And actually, one of the IE providers that I work for sent me a couple of books by Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's one of my favorite theologians, who escaped from Poland 6 weeks before the Germans invaded. That's why he didn't end up in Treblinka. And he had a journalist ask him, how come you're here at this demonstration against the Vietnam War? He said, well, because I can't pray. Huh? So why can't you pray? Well, whenever I open my prayer book, I see images of children burning in napalm. Well, this isn't exactly the same situation here for me, because you guys aren't behaving that badly. But basically, I have to do something about the way you treat kids, because otherwise, really, I can't pray. I can't talk to God if I don't do something about these kids that you are maliciously harming in many cases. And you know who you are who do that. If you don't do that, then it's a lot easier. So if you want to get along with me, if you find me to be a nuisance when I'm fighting against you and so forth, don't compel me to fight against you by mistreating the kids, cheating the parents, and lying to them.
Okay. We are moving on to C1, program transfer request. This will be taken to the superintendents on Friday, and it was taken to CAC last Tuesday. And as you know, we extended the deadline, so it'll be a two-phase vote for the superintendents. They'll need to vote, first of all, to approve those that are at the top of the page to be considered, so to approve the extension of the timeline, basically. And then all of these then would subsequently be voted to be approved for this coming year, 1920. And if they do not vote unanimously, then you would have to wait till the following year. So please look at the information for your particular district and let me know if there's anything that we haven't captured exactly the way it should be here, because we want to take it the way it should be to the superintendents on Friday. So if you're on here, is your information correct?
As far as I know.
I think all Columbus and Etiwanda are correct.
Okay, thank you. And Luana?
Yes.
Okay. Janice? All right, we're good to go. Is there any discussion you want to talk about this, or are we good? Good? We're good. Okay. Thank you. C2, we have a public comment card from Peter, and the topic is the independent educational evaluation criteria on our BP and AR that Royal presented.
Okay, well, I have a few observations to make, about 2 or 3. One of them is the expense caps are clearly improper in some cases. For example, there's a $1,000 cap on visual processing assessments. We know that you have a routine contract with Coates, Janet Coates, for $1,089, which exceeds the cap. And you don't have any problem with that. And certainly the assessment that she produces is nowhere near as comprehensive as it should be in certain respects. It's something that these days will be. I've never seen how this $1,000 cap was arrived at. I've asked, but nobody's told me. It seems to me that somebody just arbitrarily and capriciously yanked it out of the air. Nobody appears to have actually rationalized exactly, how you get there. It's just arbitrary. When we get to the speech, we find a $1,500 cap in speech and language. You have a contract with Susan Holler at $2,800 to do IEs. You have a contract with Justine Sherman for $2,325 a pop to do IEs. And you have a contract for Jump and Shout to do IEs at $2,500 each, all of would vastly exceed the cap. So it's evident that the $1,500 cap is not there for the purpose of limiting how much you're going to spend on IEs. It's there for the purpose of giving yourselves an excuse to arbitrarily refuse to authorize assessments by providers when you don't feel like it. In fact, we've had provider Susan Holler refuse, even though she has a $2,800 contract, when you all just don't feel like granting it, even though, in fact, you've already agreed at a $2,800. So the cap is not supposed to be there as a vehicle to arbitrarily refuse to allow IEs by providers that you don't like on a given occasion. It's supposed to be there as a good faith effort to keep people from charging ridiculous amounts of money to the district for their assessment. It's not what you're using it for. That's a problem. Another problem, which has been there for a while, is that you have a statement in there that it is a conflict of interest for an IE provider to then provide the services. That's not true. Any of you that go and get eyeglasses from an optometrist, for example, don't expect the optometrist to prescribe the eyeglasses and then you go someplace else to get the glasses in the frames, because it's a conflict of interest for him to provide the glasses in the frames after he, checked your eyes out. And the same thing goes for others. None of you, in none of your districts, have a policy for speech and language pathologists. If they assess, you then have to have some other speech and language pathologist deliver the services.
Thank you, Peter.
So, I wanted to finish my sentence. You cannot put on a restriction that you don't apply to your own people. It's unlawful.
Rita, you also wanted to speak to this?
Yes, I wanted to echo Mr. Atwood's comments, and I'll pick up where he left off on the conflict of interest issue. Because what is happening is that you have some policies, like in this instance, but they're not applied equally. We're supposed to have a concept of equal protection under the law. And the way it's set up right now, and this is the same for the due process filings, because I've requested policies and procedures on how the WESELPA determines when they're going to litigate a case, and there are none. The decision is left to Royal Lord, and if he wakes up on the wrong side of the bed that morning, then he won't approve the $2,800 speech and language pathology assessment. Or if a parent that he doesn't like me, asks for it, then he might deny it because he's got that power and nobody is providing the appropriate oversight. So you have a bureaucrat essentially with this power to make these decisions, and it ends up in an arbitrary and capricious situation where it's hit and miss. And so I have heard these stories, and actually in Altaloma I attended a hearing that was open to the public, and the dispute was over a vision therapy assessment because the WESELPA said the policy was a cap of $1,000. At the end of the day, the assessment cost $800, but it still went to hearing. And of course, Altaloma will say, we won, and that's not much to say with the Office of Administrative Hearings. It is now a federal lawsuit. It is now a federal lawsuit. And at the end of the day, it'll probably cost the district, because in federal court, the district will most likely lose. It'll cost the district $50,000 to $60,000 in attorney fees over a $0 dispute. And there's a heck of a lot of kids that could have learned to read and could have gotten vision therapy services for that amount of money. But this is the system, the perverse nature of the system that you have in place now, where the litigators are running the show. And Royal Lord is only too happy to oblige, because it makes his job easier. Thank you.
I want to, at the last PAC meeting, we brought this administrative regulation for first reading, so I'd like to bring it back for a second reading and a recommendation from this panel to the superintendent's council.
So do you want us to make a motion that,
That they,
or you just would like to hear
if there's any comment or recommendations that we need to pass on to the superintendent.
Okay, so if anybody has anything. And I want to thank you for the nice job you did sending out, getting multiple costs to compare with and everything. Okay, so no comments? I guess we will move on. Do you have anybody wanting to speak to see anything? No. Okay, so too much. That's yours.
Thank you, Susan. This is the second time we've brought the preschool funding workgroup recommendations to this committee. Just a quick background on how this agenda item came about. Up until this year, there was a separate federal preschool grant called the Federal Preschool Local Entitlement. Historically, that money has been allocated to the county and it helped support their first class program. Now, for 18-19, that grant was being combined with a larger federal grant called the Federal Local Assistance Grant. So the work group was formed to figure out how much money, if any, was going to be allocated to the county to help support their first class program. The work group met in September and December, and they came up with the following two recommendations. The first one, A, is for this year only, 2018-19, and it basically keeps everything status quo. So although for this year there's going to be a combined larger local assistance grant, we're actually going to separate it into another smaller portion to fund the first class program, or actually to support the first class program. So how we came up with that money is we're going to take a larger combined grant and set aside approximately 6.3% for the SBCSS first class program. And then after that, the remaining amount of money is going to be distributed using our current method, which is district of service. I have a spreadsheet on the next page that I'll walk you through in a second. The second recommendation B, is for next year and moving forward after that. So the work group wanted to change the allocation method from district of service to district of residence. So what that meant was primarily the county, being a service provider, wouldn't receive any funding, and their first class program would become a fee-for-service program. So let me walk you through the attached documents so we can talk about the fiscal impact of each recommendation. After the narrative is recommendation A. Again, this is status quo. So at the very top, you can see the 17-18 grants. There's two of them. And you can see that the preschool portion was about 6.3% based on 17-18 actuals. So when we get to 18-19 grant award, and we haven't received it yet, we're going to set aside 6.3%. It's approximately, we're estimating about $1 million. We're going to set that amount aside for the first class program, and then the remaining balance, we're going to distribute it as we've been doing by district of service. The fiscal impact of this recommendation is basically null. That's because we're basically keeping it the way it's been previously. So districts can expect to receive about what they've been receiving in the past. Now, recommendation B, which begins in 1920, is on the next page. That one's a little bit different. So instead of setting aside 6.3%, we're gonna just distribute the whole amount by district of residence. So as you can see, the county actually doesn't receive any funding, and it looks like on paper that districts receive more funding. I'll get into that in a second. So the tricky part about this is because of our funding model, we actually take the two biggest sources of special ed revenue, which is this federal local assistance grant and state AB 602 funding. So we take these two biggest sources of revenue and we combine it together in one big pot. And we take that pot of money and we distribute it to all members by their proportionate share of ADA. Now, this initial distribution by ADA is the deciding factor in how much special ed funding each district would receive. So, after we do that initial ADA distribution, we then go back and say, okay, Upland gets about, I'll say 10% of this money. We then go back and say, let's call a portion of that local assistance by doing a side calculation, and then the rest is state AB 602. So it gets a little convoluted, but the point being is, now that we change the method for local assistance, it affects your state funding as well. So if you increase or decrease the amount of federal money your district's gonna receive, your state money kind of balances it out. So if you increase the amount of federal money you receive, then your state is gonna decrease because your district's share of the money was already decided by your proportionate share of ADA. So I know it sounds confusing, so on the next page, I did a breakdown. So column A, again, this is, I'll just call it the status quo, what we've been doing in the past. Column B is what they're proposing for 2019-20 and beyond, and is basically by district of residence. Column C is the difference between those two. So again, on paper, it looks like all districts are receiving more federal local assistance money. But you also have to factor in the corresponding change to your state funding. I've done that for you in column D. So again, most districts receive more money in column C, but then their state funding goes down in column D. Column E is your total change, basically column C and D combined. As you can see, as with everything at the WESELPA, there are winners and losers. I went ahead and broke column E down in columns F through I, so you can see why that amount changed. Basically, F is, there's an extra $1 million that is now being distributed by ADA to all members. That's an increase to all of your special ed revenue. But now in column G, if you have any students attending first class, you're gonna pay a fee for service. So some districts, I guess they would proportionally have more users of the first class program. They're gonna pay more into that than they actually receive. So the end result is they receive less money overall. A good example would be Central. You can see that their proportionate share of that $1 million is about $50,000, but they're projected to spend about $138,000 in fee for service. So in the end, they're going to receive less money overall. Chaffey, on the other hand, they'll receive more money proportionally by ADA because they're our second largest district. They don't have any fee for service usage in our first class program, so they'll receive more money overall. And hopefully I explained that well enough, but I know our funding model is very complicated. We change any little thing and it trickles down throughout the whole funding formula. So again, like small changes like column H and I, those are just a byproduct of changing any little part of our funding model. Were there any questions on it? Questions, concerns?
And this will go to superintendent's on Friday also.
It will,
So you just that.
and yeah, I would like to get a recommendation for Pat, but I leave it up to you guys.
Is it on superintendent's council for Friday?
Yes, it is, as an action item.
Maybe I missed this, a step, but column C, you have the change in the local assistant. That would be how much less money we would get, or that's how much we're getting?
Column C would be how much more you'll receive in local assistance.
And then corresponding change in AB 62 funding in column D would be
How much less you would receive in AB 602 state funding, because like I said previously, the total amount of your district's special ed funding is based on your share of ADA. So if you increase one, the other one automatically decreases. Not dollar for dollar because our funding model is so complicated, but generally that's how it works.
But is that because then you have calculated in the money that would be set aside for the fee for service?
It is, yes.
So for me, that's confusing because it's not really that we're receiving less funding, we're just paying it in a different model.
You could say that as well.
Okay, because I'm looking at column E and I'm looking at column J, and the outcome is the same.
But it's
Right.
further
All of
impacted
them-
by safety.
So column E and J are the same. I just did a breakdown of column E and columns F through J. They're the
Right.
same number exactly.
But I think you have to be careful about talking about the change in funding, because it's not unless I'm getting it wrong then, because the funding is there, but the money would be taken off the top for county first fee for first class.